The events of the film begin in the city of Brighton, England, in 1957. At that time, Tony and his partner Frank were on a surveillance patrol, which happened to be in front of their colleague Colin's house. After a while, Tony got out of the car and entered the house, where he found Colin's wife waiting for him. About 15 minutes later, Colin arrived and entered the house. When Frank saw him, he followed him inside and stopped him at the last moment from shooting Tony. During that moment of chaos, Tony escaped through the window, climbed over the fence, and fled. Frank tried to climb after him but couldn't make it to the other side, so Tony went back to help him. Meanwhile, Officer Dave, Colin's partner, arrived with Officer Nicholas. They ran toward Colin to stop him from shooting Frank, but as they approached, Colin accidentally pointed his gun at Nicholas and fired, killing him instantly. 2 years later, it is revealed that divorce laws in Brighton during the 1950s were very strict. Because of that, many people resorted to deceptive tactics to obtain a divorce. To make it happen, husbands would fake an affair so their wives could file for divorce. All they needed was a hired woman paid by the hour, a compromising photo, and a private investigator to arrange the setup and take the incriminating pictures. After leaving the police force, Tony started working as a private investigator specializing in such cases. He made a deal with a lawyer to help him fake an adultery scandal so that the lawyer's wife would file for divorce. With the cooperation of Tony's own wife, Heather, she went with the lawyer to a hotel. Once they entered the room, Tony burst in and photographed them in a compromising position. That same night, Heather accompanied Tony to his office, where they were living because of his poor financial situation. After Tony developed the photos, Heather found his gun and asked, "Since when do you have this weapon?" He replied that he had owned it for a long time but never used it since it wasn't licensed, then took it from her. The next morning, the famous Italian painter Stasio was in the car with Tony, heading to a hotel. There, Heather met them and went up to the room Tony had reserved for her and Stasio. After seeing them go upstairs, Tony stayed in the hotel bar. About half an hour later, he grabbed his bag containing the camera and went up to the upper floor. On the stairs, he met a maid and told her he had forgotten his room key, asking her to open the door for him. When she did, they both walked down the hallway, and Tony was shocked to discover Stasio and Heather brutally murdered inside the room. Moments later, Frank arrived with a police team. They examined the crime scene and questioned everyone present. Frank tried to calm Tony, who was in shock, and asked where he had been during the time of the murder. Tony answered that he was in the hotel bar. Frank took his fingerprints since he had touched the doorknob, to compare them with those found in the room. After attending the funeral, Tony was summoned by Frank for questioning, with Dave, Colin's former partner, also present. Frank asked, "Do you know who was with your wife?" Tony replied, "Yes, a prominent businessman." Dave showed him the newspaper and said, "The man with your wife was the famous and wealthy Italian painter Carlo Stasio." Frank asked, "How do you know him?" Tony explained, "His lawyer came to me a month ago, asking me to set up a fake adultery case for his client." Dave said, "Why would a famous artist choose a modest office like yours?" Tony answered, "Because he didn't want anyone to find out, and no other investigators take such cases since they're illegal, as you know." Then Frank said, "The bartender told us you left the bar for 10 minutes. Tony replied, "I just went to the restroom and came back." Dave accused him, "You probably went upstairs, killed them, and returned." Tony got angry and said, "You're trying to pin a crime on me I didn't commit." Dave replied, "You owe a lot of people money and need cash, maybe someone hired you to kill them." Tony said, "I'll pretend I didn't hear that." Dave retorted, "Don't think you'll get away with this crime like you got away with Colin's case." Tony tried to punch Dave, but Frank stopped him. Then Frank asked if he owned a gun. Tony replied, "Do you really believe I could kill my wife and a man I met for the first time that day?" He added, "I'm leaving." Frank said, "Before you go, did anyone tell you that the killer cut off Stasio's thumb and took it?" Tony was shocked and asked, "No. Why?" Frank replied, "We don't know yet." The next day, Tony attended Stasio's funeral with Frank. There, a witness told them a red car had been parked behind the hotel the night of the murder. At the funeral, they also saw Stasio's wife, Selina, who was deeply emotional, and his mistress, Angelina. It was clear that Selina hated Angelina and even kicked her out of the funeral. The following day, Tony brought flowers to Stasio's mansion. He asked the maid to see the lady of the house, but she refused, so he wrote a note on his card saying, "My wife was murdered too," and asked her to deliver it. The maid gave it to Angelina, who agreed to meet him. When Tony met her, he noticed she was wearing a necklace with a single key on it. He told her he expected to meet Selina, but she replied that the house was hers now, not Selina's. Tony said he would find the killer no matter what and asked about Stasio's paintings. Before she could answer, Frank arrived, asking Tony what he was doing there. Angelina interrupted and told him to leave, and Frank ordered Tony to get out, so he did. Outside, Frank warned him, "Don't go near her again. I'll assign guards to her 24/7, and if anyone sees you near the house, you'll be arrested." In the car, Tony told him, Selina had a motive. Her husband transferred ownership of the mansion to Angelina. Frank replied, "She has a solid alibi. She was at a party in London, and many people saw her there." Tony said, "Then Angelina is the killer." Frank responded, "She also has an alibi, she was with Stasio's lawyer at the same time." Tony asked, "And what was she doing with the lawyer?" When they reached the lawyer's office, Frank refused to let Tony come inside and went in alone. He questioned the lawyer, trying to get any helpful details, but the lawyer was very cautious. All he said was that Stasio had asked him to summon Angelina to discuss something important, and that she left his office at 10 p.m. Meanwhile, Tony sneaked into the mansion's backyard, where he saw Angelina's red car, matching the description of the vehicle seen behind the hotel on the night of the murder. As soon as he entered the house, Angelina struck him on the head, thinking he was a burglar. When he regained consciousness, she told him it was his fault for entering without permission. She then took him to the studio, opened the door with her key, and told him Stasio had loved her obsessively and never let her leave him. She explained that Stasio's paintings sold for millions, and to prevent forgeries, he would sign each one and mark it with his thumbprint. That's when Tony realized why the killer had cut off Stasio's thumb, to forge paintings and sell them as originals. Angelina said she didn't care about money. She picked up one of Stasio's paintings and said, "This one is worth $20,000, then threw it into the fire, adding, "If you can take it out, it's yours." Tony quickly pulled it out of the flames before it was destroyed. She looked at him and said, "See? You're the one who cares about money, not me." Meanwhile, Dave showed Frank a photo from a police party 3 years earlier, showing Tony participating in a shooting competition. That evening, Frank went to Tony's office and confronted him about it. Tony said it had just been a hobby and admitted that he did own a gun, but it was only a keepsake and unlicensed. Frank said, "Show me the gun." Tony started looking for it, but couldn't find it. At that moment, he tells Frank, "Someone is trying to pin this crime on me no matter what." The next morning, Angelina sees Frank and the forensic team searching her car. Frank asks if she went straight home the night of the murder, and she replies that she stopped by a bar for a drink before going home. He asks what time she got back, but she says she doesn't remember, then leaves and returns to the mansion. A little later, she goes to Tony's office and tells him that before Stasio was killed, he had asked his lawyer to explain something about what he was doing at the hotel. She says she went there and parked her car behind the hotel but left quickly, afraid to tell the police because she thought they might suspect her of killing Stasio. Meanwhile, Frank visits the lawyer's house and asks his wife when her husband returned home on the night of the murder. She says he always comes home after she's asleep. As Frank leaves, he runs into the lawyer outside. The lawyer, upset, tells him, "If you want to question me, come to my office. Don't ever come to my house again or bother my wife with your pointless questions." Frank leaves and goes to Selina's apartment. She speaks to him briefly at the door, and after he leaves, Tony arrives to question her. She says, "Your colleague was just here, and I already answered all his questions." Tony assures her he won't take much of her time, so she lets him in. She begins to talk and says her husband always had short-lived affairs, but he promised never to leave her, until he met Angelina. After that, he listened only to her and followed her like a child. She tells Tony she was the reason for his fame since she owned a company that exhibited and sold artists' paintings for high prices. When she first saw Stasio's work, she believed in his talent, sold his first painting, and from then on, he became famous and wealthy. Eventually, the roles reversed, and Selina started following him instead. She adds that none of that matters now, ever since he threw her out, she no longer loved him. All she wants is to get her hands on his paintings. That same night, Tony meets Angelina. She tells him she knows everyone thinks she's the killer, but she isn't. She says she saw someone running by the hotel on the night of the murder but couldn't see his face clearly because of the darkness. Tony asks why she didn't tell the police, and she says she was afraid they'd think she was lying to divert suspicion from herself. They spend the night together. The next day, Frank takes Tony back to the crime scene and asks him to inspect the room carefully. Tony finds the pillow used to muffle the gunshot, and from the blood pattern, they deduce that the killer stood by the bathroom door. When they go into the bathroom, they find a balcony and a ladder leading to the roof. They climb up, trying to figure out where the killer might have hidden the murder weapon. Then they notice a hatch leading to the boiler room and go down there. They find the hotel's furnace operator, who manages the system that provides hot water through a large coal-burning boiler. Suddenly, they both get the same idea and look inside the furnace, only to discover a gun hidden within. When they pull it out, they see the serial number engraved on it. It's Tony's gun. The crime is now pinned on him, but he insists he's innocent and that someone is framing him. He begs Frank to stand by him and give him 24 hours to prove his innocence. They go together to the lawyer's office, where Tony manages to unlock a storage door behind the office. Inside, they overhear the lawyer reading Stasio's will to Selena and Angelina. At that moment, Selena is shocked to learn that Stasio left all his fortune, including his paintings, to Angelina. She tells the lawyer the will is fake because she was with Stasio when he signed the paintings in her name. The lawyer insists the will was changed the same day Stasio was killed. Furious, Selena shouts. Then she killed him to get rid of him after he left her everything. Meanwhile, Tony and Frank have witnessed and overheard everything. Tony says, "I'm sure Angelina killed him. Give me a chance, I'll make her confess." Frank replies, "Stay away from her. Let me handle it." That night, Tony goes to Angelina's house and spends the night with her. After she falls asleep, he steals the key from her necklace, enters the studio, and opens the paint box. Suddenly, Angelina walks in and demands, "What are you doing here? Are you looking for proof that I killed him? I told you I didn't." He tells her he believes her but had to be sure himself. He manages to convince her to go with him to his office, where they talk briefly. Tony shows her his lighter and says it was a gift from Frank. He explains that even though it once fell and got run over by a car, he still keeps it even though it no longer works properly. He opens it in a special way to make it spark, and at that moment, Angelina becomes frightened and runs away from him. Tony doesn't understand why, and when he rushes after her, he trips and falls. Dave appears and says, "I've been watching you for a long time. I know Frankie's trying to clear your name, but I won't let that happen," and arrests him. Tony is put on trial, and all the evidence is against him. Angelina testifies that she saw a man running by the hotel that night. His face wasn't clear, but she saw him stop to light a cigarette, and he did it in the exact same way Tony lights his. Realizing he has no hope left, Tony sends a note to Frank that reads, "Help me." Frank is devastated and doesn't know how to save him. After the closing arguments and witness testimonies, the jury finds Tony guilty, and the judge sentences him to death. The next day, Frank visits him in prison. Tony, in despair, says, "There must be a way to prove my innocence. Please don't give up on me." Frank promises, "I'll do everything I can." He begins to follow Angelina and discovers she's booked a ticket to America, though her behavior doesn't raise any suspicion. The day before Tony's execution, Frank visits him again. Tony, hopeless, tells him, "Search Angelina's house one more time. You'll definitely find proof against her." That night, Angelina packs her bags and leaves the mansion in her car. At the same time, Frank breaks a window, enters the house, and searches every corner until morning. Finally, he opens the paint box, and is shocked to find Stasio's severed thumb preserved inside a small container among the paint jars. Meanwhile, the district attorney attends Tony's execution in person. When Frank calls him, there's no answer. Frank jumps into his car and speeds toward the prison. Inside, officers escort Tony to the execution chamber. He's distraught, shouting, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill them." At the same time, Frank drives as fast as he can to save his friend, but he crashes in an accident. Tony is led onto the scaffold, the noose placed around his neck. As the lever is pulled and the floor opens beneath him, he begins to choke. Just as Frank regains consciousness, rushes into the prison, and arrives at the last second to catch his friend and save him from death. Afterward, Angelina is arrested and imprisoned. Tony thanks Frank for saving his life and tells him he's leaving England to move to America. He also asks Frank to arrange permission for him to visit Angelina in prison. When he sees her, she says, "How could you do this? You know I didn't kill them. How could you plant that evidence in the studio?" He doesn't answer, only says, "I just came to see you before I leave." A week later, Selena arrives at her company after receiving her late husband's inheritance. There, she meets Tony, who now looks wealthy. She tells him she sold 30 of Stasio's paintings after adding his thumbprint to them and has dozens more to sell for huge sums. She writes him a check for half the profit and says, "Since you're my partner, you'll make a lot of money with me in the coming years." Tony looks regretful and says, "You thought she only wanted his money. But when I got close to her, I realized she didn't care about that, she just wanted to get away from him. He was the one who couldn't let her go." She asks, "Did you love her?" He replies, "No, it was just business, nothing more." And with that, the film ends. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.